All right, guys. So we are rapidly approaching the start of the 2022 NFL season. Jaguars training camp starts on July 24th, and the Jaguars' first preseason game is actually August 4th. So we're a little less than 2 weeks away from the start of the training camp and a little over 3 weeks away from the start of the preseason, which is going to be extremely exciting. And it's always a better time of year when football is here. So I thought we might as well go ahead and go through with our Jacksonville Jaguars 2022 NFL preview. It's an exciting time as a Jaguars fan. And when you look at what the Jaguars did this offseason, I think there were really two big additions that we can talk about. The first addition was an addition by subtraction when it comes to getting Urban Meyer out of the building. Now, Urban Meyer will probably go down as the worst NFL coach in history of the NFL. I mean, it was that bad. He's at the very worst, like a top five. Throw him in the top five, and we can go and sit here and debate on what was the worst. But he came in here. His offensive scheme was horrible. There was dysfunction all around the team. Dysfunction was at an all-time high when we had him. There's always been dysfunction with the Jaguars, but with Urban Meyer in the building, it was just ramped up to 100. There was a lot of trust issues, and at the end of the day, he just did not know what he was doing. I mean, it was clear, and if you watch him in his press conferences, it's like every week he just gave up more and more hope to the point where it was the ultimate example of a guy just showing up to get a paycheck. It wasn't a pretty sight to see. Now we go on to our second big addition, which is the addition of Doug Pederson. Now, Doug Pederson is the complete opposite of a guy like Urban Meyer. Doug Peterson's going to come in and bring in a good offensive scheme. He's bringing in a bunch of experienced coaches and a bunch of really quarterbacks too. And my quarterbacks, I mean, coaches on the coaching staff that were former quarterbacks when it comes to offensive coordinator Press Taylor, pass game coordinator Jim Bob Cooter, or quarterbacks coach Mike McCoy. It was just a bunch of former quarterbacks, so a bunch of guys that are going to be working closely with Trevor Lawrence that can also see the game through Trevor Lawrence's eyes. And he also brings in a shiny Super Bowl ring into the Jaguars organization. So it's exciting, and the Jaguars were able to really reel in a big fish. Even though Doug Pederson, he wasn't the Jaguars' first option. They kind of got lucky. It felt like the Jaguars, when it comes to the Doug Pederson hiring, it was almost like Shad Khan accidentally hired the right guy. But nevertheless, thrilled to have him in the building and thrilled to be able to move forward with a coach that, has the experience and has the NFL pedigree to back himself up. Now, really, when you look at the Jaguars, the Jags were 3-14 in 2021. Extremely disappointing season when really the Jaguars were when it comes to the hype of the fan base, it was at an all-time high, man. I mean, we cleaned house, got rid of Doug Marrone. It took me so long to start calling Doug Pederson, not Doug Marrone, but now I'm getting them mixed up. But, we finally got Doug Marrone and Dave Caldwell out of the building. You knew you had the number one overall pick with Trevor Lawrence coming in, and he had a bunch of draft capital and a bunch of money. It was clearly the new era. And then we bring in the big name with Urban Meyer, pair him up with Trevor Lawrence, and man, we were so hyped for the season. And then the season started, and then the depression set in. It was just a terrible, terrible year. Squeaked in a couple of random wins in there with Miami, the Bills, and finished out the season nicely against the Colts. But 3-14, man, was not fun. But now the Jaguars move forward after being the worst team in the NFL, and now it all starts with Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence is going into his second year as the Jaguars quarterback. And, last year, he really did not have a great year. I mean, 12 touchdowns versus 17 interceptions, 59.6% completion percentage, and 3,641 passing yards. But really, I mean, if I don't want to be Mr. Excuse Maker, for Trevor Lawrence. But I mean, if anybody watched the Jaguars and just understood what was going on around the Jaguars building, don't look at the stats, look at what was going on. And it was just, we brought in this rookie quarterback, this generational guy, and we didn't give him any help. I mean, we paired him up with the worst NFL head coach of all time, who brought in coaches that he didn't even know, guys that, Trent Baalke had to line up interviews with him, and he just kind of picked his favorite guy. They brought in a terrible offensive scheme with them. They brought in like a receiver group that just wasn't very good. You brought in Travis Etienne with him, but he got hurt. So like just the supporting cast around him, personnel wise, was not good. So Trevor Lawrence it just felt like left on an island, and he was out there in press conferences answering for what Urban Meyer was doing in Cincinnati. He was out there saying, yeah, I think James Robinson should have been in the game. I told Urban Meyer that. When the Jaguars weren't running quarterback sneaks, the coaching staff was saying, oh, Trevor doesn't know how to run that. Then Trevor goes up there and says, oh, yeah, I know how to run that. That is not normal. That is not normal for coaches to go through that, or for players to have to go through that. But we put the 21-year-old kid through the ringer, but now what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Hopefully now he can move forward, with a better just understanding and just a better perspective of how much worse it could be. And, sometimes when you go through some really tough times and some big challenges, it makes you just a lot better going forward. So it didn't appear that Trevor Lawrence was broken last year. Sometimes you see quarterbacks over time kind of break, but Trevor Lawrence wasn't that. So, but really when it comes to the viability of the Jaguars, it's all about how good can Trevor Lawrence be. Nowadays quarterbacks are, you can make these random runs where you have a crappy quarterback and you make a playoff run. But when it comes to sustained success, you need a great head coach who brings in a great culture, and you also need a great quarterback. And that's hopefully what we have in Trevor Lawrence. And it's tricky. Like, a lot of people ask me, like, what are your expectations for Trevor Lawrence this year? It's hard to answer that but I think ultimately at the end of the year, I want Trevor Lawrence to be able to put out on the field that nobody is questioning whether he's the answer. This year we're all, he didn't have a good year last year, but we're all kind of sitting here making excuses for it. And look, the excuses are rightfully so, but I don't want, this time next year for me to be making excuses for what Trevor Lawrence did in year 2. I don't want that. So when it comes to a trajectory, sometimes players come in and right away they're great. You saw that with Justin Herbert. You saw that with Joe Burrow. Patrick Mahomes sat his rookie year, but his second year he came out on fire. But sometimes it gets a little bit slower, and a lot of that has to do with like kind of a supporting cast. If you look at the way Josh Allen kind of transitioned into the NFL, his first year he wasn't that great. Kind of like Trevor Lawrence. His second year was a little bit better. He was probably like, everyone kind of saw him as like a top maybe 15 quarterback, maybe even top, somewhere in the top 15. And then really his third year is when he exploded. His third year, we were all arguing like, okay, is Josh Allen a top 5 quarterback? And then year 4, he solidified himself as a top 5 quarterback. So sometimes, it takes players a little bit longer. We'll see with Trevor Lawrence how long it takes a guy like him to be able to explode on the scene in his own way. But yeah, I have that's the big thing. So now, when you look at really what the Jaguars did to the offense, they did get better around him. They added players at every position group, but how much better did the Jaguars get around him? The running back room, now you have a healthy Travis Etienne, which is good. You have a rehabbing James Robinson, but Travis Etienne, I think, will be the ultimate X factor of the team. At the wide receiver group, you bring in Christian Kirk on a lot of money, Zay Jones, and hopefully you have some bounce back years from Laviska Shenault. And then in a tight end room, you bring in like Evan Ingram. So Evan Ingram is a very athletic tight end. So you bring in some athleticism, and of course on the offensive line, you retain left tackle Cam Robinson. We'll figure out what we want to do with tackle Walker Little, whether he probably moves over to right tackle or whatever we do with him. And then you bring in all-pro right guard Brandon Sheriff. So the Jaguars did a lot, but I named a bunch of guys. But how much, these guys are good. They're probably upgrades, but how much better is that? Now, like I was naming the quarterbacks earlier, like Justin Herbert. Okay, Justin Herbert has like Keenan Allen. He has Mike Williams. Even Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. He has Tyler Boyd. Josh Allen has like Stephon Diggs. The Jaguars, I like Christian Kirk, but I do think at the end of the 2022 season, we're going to be saying, okay, we need that big X wide receiver. And look, do I blame the Jaguars for not bringing in that guy? Not necessarily, because look, the Jaguars were the worst team in the NFL last year. I mean, you can't fix every position. I mean, you can't. But the Jaguars went out there and they broke an NFL record for the amount of guaranteed money given out in free agency. So, you can only do so much. But hopefully next year in the draft, something like that comes. So really with this offense, it's going to be Doug Pederson, Press Taylor, and Trevor Lawrence just working to form an offense and go to look at what Trevor Lawrence did for over there at Clemson and, kind of do some similar stuff. Like, really it was pretty similar to the scheme at Clemson to Doug Pederson's offense, kind of that West Coast system. So, running a lot of RPOs. So I think it's going to be a really good match having these two guys together. So we kind of move on to the defense. Now, defense coordinator Mike Caldwell, they gave him a lot of toys in the offseason. I mean, the Jaguars really invested in the defense more than I thought they would. I mean, in the draft, 2 first-round picks on defense when it comes to the number 1 overall pick, Travon Walker, as well as linebacker Devin Lloyd. And you also brought in linebacker Chad Muma in the 3rd round. And then free agency, Foye Oluwakin, who was an NFL tackle leader last year, Foley Fatu Kasi, Darius Williams, who's a cornerback, and then Arden Key. So you bring in a bunch of guys, and you're hoping that even guys going into their 2nd year, like Tyson Campbell, the cornerback, safety, Andre Sisco, those arrows are pointing up. So you have really, it's going to be a brand new looking defense. And with, Mike Caldwell's defense, if it's anything like Todd Bowles, it's going to be very exotic. But in order to run that kind of defense, you have to have dogs on the defense. So the Jaguars went out there, and it feels like they got the players to be able to fit that kind of scheme and really be able to be versatile. You have 3 linebackers who can easily play 3 downs. Of course, not all of them can, but you got a bunch of 3-down linebackers, and it's exciting to kind of see what they did really on a defensive front. Now, when it comes to my expectations for the Jaguars, it's tough. I mean, it really is tough. I think Vegas has our over-under at 6.5, which is definitely fair. Now, if the Jaguars go 6-11, I will not be happy. If the Jaguars go 7-10, I'm kind of like, I guess that's acceptable. I want the Jaguars to go 8-9. Now, there's going to be people in the comments section, oh, how can you say 8-9? It's way too... It's like, look, is me asking the Jaguars to have a losing record, is that asking a lot? I mean, seriously? And nowadays, man, teams turn around quicker than they normally do. The Jaguars did a lot in the offseason, and if these players can be what the Jaguars spent money on and what they drafted to be, if Doug Pederson can be that Super Bowl caliber head coach, and if Trevor Lawrence can be a good quarterback, the guy that we thought he could be, that should be an easily attainable goal in a questionable AFC South. You know what I mean? And also you look at this is really year 3 of the rebuild. I had a bunch of arguments with people last year saying, 2021 was year 1 of the rebuild. No, it was not. 2020 was the year where we traded anybody that had any kind of draft that we could get draft capital out of. We cut guys like Leonard Fournette. That was the year where we broke it down to the bare minimum and said, okay, we're probably going to tank this year. We're going to get the number 1 pick, get a quarterback. And, you had a couple first round picks. One isn't even there anymore. We're in year 3 of a roster rebuild. Even though year 3 of this roster rebuild brings us to year 3 of a different coach, it's still year 3 of a rebuild. So the Jaguars, the roster, and when you look at the Jaguars in 2023 and 2024, the sky should be the limit those years. You know what I mean? The Jaguars should be having the Super Bowl in mind when it comes to goals because they've had long enough time to build the roster. So with that said, really the nucleus of those teams, the cornerstone players of those Super Bowl teams should be on the roster right now. Guys like Trevor Lawrence, Christian Kirk, like Brandon Sheriff, Travis Etienne, Trevon Walker, Josh Allen. Like, those guys are here. Really, with the Jaguars in 2022, it's like a rush to maturity because you have a lot of new pieces on this Jaguars team. It's just how quickly can these guys, these brand new parts come together, play as one, be a solid team, be a good team, and really start playing like that and moving forward and bringing out wins in 2022. That's going to be the big question because, the Jaguars, they could, like, if they don't rush to maturity quick enough, they could start off in September and be 1-3. Then, like, 2-2 in October. Then you're sitting there at what? What is that, like 3-5, halfway through the year? Then you might have like a winning November, but then you're kind of 500. It's a tough, slippery road, but it's all about, man, can this team get on fire early and be good? That is just going to have to be determined. But I'm hoping for the Jaguars 8-9 this year, and then next year the sky is the limit. Next year training wheels are off. Next year we're not saying, oh, can the Jaguars please have a losing record, just not that bad of a losing record? No. Next year it should be AFC South title, Super Bowl title. That should be the goal. But, we'll see what this Jaguars nucleus looks like this year. But it's going to be exciting at the end of the day. We have a good coach. We get to see more of Trevor Lawrence, and we just get to see, a roster that is a lot different than last year. So, with all that said, thank you guys so much for watching the video. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know some of your predictions for next year. Getting excited for this season. I can smell it coming. So, yeah. Thank you guys for watching. Go Jags.